Have you ever felt like your silence was mistaken for weakness? Like people thought you didn't care, just because you didn't shout back? This is the story of Arif, a boy who showed the world that silence isn't emptiness. It's power, focus, and wisdom waiting to speak at the right time. In a peaceful village surrounded by green hills lived Arif, a calm, soft-spoken boy. While others loved to show off their strength by shouting, fighting, or arguing, Arif stayed quiet. He spoke only when needed, and when he did, his words carried weight. But not everyone understood him. At school, some called him mute. Others laughed, saying, he doesn't even have the courage to speak up. Even his teachers thought he lacked confidence. Arif never argued. He never shouted back. He just smiled and kept doing his work quietly. He spent his evenings near the old temple pond, feeding fish, watching the ripples of water, listening to the sound of wind passing through the trees. People thought he was wasting time, but in reality, Arif was learning something no book could teach: the language of silence. One morning, news spread through the village like wildfire. The king of their land had announced a challenge. He wanted to find one young man from each village to join the Royal Academy, a place where the chosen ones would be trained to become future leaders and advisors to the king himself. The selection test would take place in the royal court. Hundreds of boys from nearby villages gathered, each one loud, confident, and eager to show off. And among them stood Arif, silent, calm, observing everything. The royal minister stepped forward and said, "There will be 3 rounds. Each round will test your strength, not of body, but of mind and spirit." The first test was the test of reaction. A golden plate was placed on the table. The minister said, "Whoever picks it up first when I clap, wins." The boys' bodies tensed. Everyone stared at the plate, waiting for the clap. Suddenly, the minister pretended to clap, and half the boys jumped early. They failed. He repeated the trick again, and more boys fell for it. But Arif didn't move. He just stood there, still as stone, eyes calm, waiting for the real signal. Finally, when the real clap echoed through the hall, Arif moved. He picked up the plate calmly without rush. The minister smiled. "Silence teaches patience," he said, "and patience wins half the battles." The second round was the test of listening. The minister whispered an important message to the first boy in line and asked him to pass it down the row. By the time the message reached the last boy, it had changed completely, from "peace builds kingdoms" to "the king builds prisons." Everyone laughed, but when it was Arif's turn, he listened with full attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't assume. When he repeated the message to the next boy, every word was accurate. And when the message reached the minister, it was exactly the same as the original. The minister nodded. In noise, truth gets lost. In silence, truth survives. Then came the final test, the test of wisdom. The king himself entered the hall, his presence commanding silence. He looked at the boys and said, "Tell me, what gives more power, speaking or staying silent?" One boy shouted, "Speaking, because words can change the world." Another said, "Shouting shows courage, my lord." Some said, "Silence is useless." Then came Arif's turn. He bowed, then said softly, "My king, both speaking and silence are powerful, but only when used at the right time." The king raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Arif took a breath. "When you speak in anger, your words become your enemy. But when you stay silent and understand, your silence becomes your strength. Speech shows knowledge, but silence shows wisdom. A lion doesn't roar all the time, yet everyone fears its silence." The hall went quiet. The king slowly stood up and smiled. "Young man," he said, "you've taught me something even my generals forget." He walked toward Arif, placed his hand on his shoulder, and declared, "From this day forward, Arif will train under my chief advisor, for he understands that silence is not emptiness. It is depth." The crowd cheered. Some of the boys who had laughed earlier looked down, ashamed. And Arif? He simply bowed and smiled, still silent, still calm. Years passed. Arif became known throughout the kingdom, not for his loud speeches, but for his wise counsel. When others panicked, he stayed calm. When others argued, he listened. And when he finally spoke, even the king listened. They called him the man who spoke through silence. So, my friend, the next time someone says you're too quiet, smile, because silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you're waiting for the right moment to say something that matters. Remember, storms make noise, but calm seas run deep. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to stay silent, stay steady, and let your actions speak. Because in a world full of noise, those who master silence master life.